which the leaders believe will strengthen multilateral trading systems on the continent. Apart from a developmental regionalism, the CFTA is envisaged as a tool for expanded markets for goods and services, promotion of economic diversification, as well as the enhancement of human capital. Much as this will be beneficial in terms of realizing the Agenda 2063 of the African Union and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development of the United Nations, the process of a comprehensive vision of trade and development remains vital. In addition, the fostering of peace, security, and political stability on the continent is also crucial. Hence, the Continental Free Trade Area must be determined to dismantle barriers and reduce costs to inter-African trade in improving productivity and competitiveness. This in turn is expected to serve as a pivot for a vibrant and resilient economic space in the global arena. Stimulating action in this direction is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, which is committed to supporting Africa in the attainment of this objective. However, there is a concern. Tariff cuts which may have negative repercussions on the trade tax earnings of countries could possibly lead to uncompetitiveness in services. A study by UNCTAD has revealed that many countries on the continent import food and agricultural products. This is illustrated by the fact that in 2007 to 2011, 37 African countries were net food importers and 22 African countries were net importers of agricultural raw materials. Succeeding with this vision, therefore, remains paramount. Experts are clamoring for a framework that will need complementary policies in a number of issues which range from unfair practices, market access of goods and services, among others. How will this be achieved and what is needed to be put in place is the focus on Good Morning Nigeria today.
All right, thank you very much there, Ngozi Chude, for that background report. Now, joining us in our studios this morning is Mr. Okechukwu Enelama, is the Honorable Minister in charge of Investment, Trade and Industry. Honorable Minister, a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, let's begin. We already have an idea from our background report by our correspondent a moment ago. How are the negotiations going? Oftentimes, negotiations of this nature are long drawn out. How are the negotiations going? Are you being able, to achieve some consensus on some of the knotty points?
Thank you very much. First, let me commend the excellent background report. I listened carefully, and I think that report is a good one. And just to hit the nail on the head on the problem we're trying to solve, is important to make people know that, or to let people know that intra-Africa trade today is roughly about 15%. Some would say it's 17, some would say it's 12, but let's just call it on average 15%. And if you compare it to any other part of the world, it's very low. In Europe it's in the 60s, in Asia it's in the 60s, all over the world it's roughly over 50% in terms of regions. And at the heart of that is an understanding and acceptance by Africa and Africans that we have to take responsibility for our own development and for our own economic growth and diversification. I think with that as a background, people accept the goal. So in terms of negotiations, there is broad agreement that it's the right thing to do. We had nobody disagreeing on that. However, the concern that has come up quite early is that people are at different stages of development. There's a concept they use where they talk about allowing people to come to the table at different stages when they're ready, which is one of the challenges we face in meeting the 2017 deadline. And I'll be happy to tell you more about what we've done about that. But four of the leading countries in Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and Egypt, we formed a group called KENSA that is helping to drive these negotiations. And we had a lot of progress last week in Addis Ababa.
Mr. Enelama, I'll still like to take you back because when we talk about these trade, agreements, we want to know, the trader there wants to know how this, affects him. So I'd like you, for the purpose of understanding, to tell us, why do we need a continental free trade agreement when we have other regional trade agreements like ECOWAS, for instance, and other regions have their own regional agreements. We have, of course, CAMSA. So why is this necessary?
Let me give you 3 reasons why it's necessary. I mean, there are many more, but let me give you the 3 that come readily to mind. The first one is that, as a general principle, the larger your market, I'm talking about markets that are receptive, that are willing to buy your goods, the better for you. So think of it as Africa wanting to make sure, instead of having fragmented markets, we have a large market where Africans can sell into. It's the same thing with Nigeria. It's like having to sell only in your state. You're better off being able to sell in the whole Nigeria. Then you're better off being able to sell in whole ECOWAS. Then you're better off being able to sell in whole Africa. And keep in mind that vitally, Africans are more likely to then accept your goods if the terms of trade are right, and the pathway to trade is made to flow, is made easy for them. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we believe that Africa needs to progress from selling sort of raw materials to Europe and other developed markets, where they then bring back the finished goods, to selling value added goods in which we've added value and that are processed amongst ourselves, and also with other parts of the world. And you'll find that this agreement will help that, just like the ECOWAS agreement is also meant to help that. And I think the final thing is that we want to move from trade to attracting investment to industrialization, and we think that this agreement, by increasing the market, will enable people to plan, and make the investments that are necessary, because they know that a wider market. One of the best examples is Alhaji Aliko Dangote. If you look at what he's doing, Africa is his core market, and look at the investments he's making, because he can plan and know how big the market is, and you can see how rapidly he's industrializing in the areas that he's involved in. The same thing can apply to other people as those markets open up to them.
Well, let's again return to the issue of pre-existing economic blocks. We have ECOWAS, it's been on since 1975. We have SADC, it's been on since 1980, and you have COMESA dealing with East Africa and so on and so forth. And then, of course, you have Egypt. Egypt is part of what you've just indicated, but oftentimes Egypt is said to be geographically in Africa, but in terms of its policy, ideology, and trade, often in the Middle East. So how will the pre-existing policies and agreements in the various regional blocks conduce to the Africa Free Trade Agreement?
Excellent question. I think the first thing to say is that we believe that those regional blocks are actually building blocks for a continental agreement. It's like learning to walk before you run. So a lot of the lessons and a lot of the issues we're dealing with in those regional blocks will inevitably arise when you deal with a bigger African bloc. So you find that each of those regions you mentioned are continuing the work they're doing with their respective regional trading blocks. So this is not a replacement for that. This is an advancement, the next level of development. It's just that the African leaders, mindful of the need to develop Africa and that nobody is going to do it for us and that we need to, hurry up a bit, have set a deadline of 2017 for those agreements to progress beyond, like you said, what we've done in the regions. And so we're putting in those building blocks. What you will find is that even the regional trading blocks are at different stages of development. Some have gone further than others.
Okay. One of the issues, that arose with regards to implementing or signing the EPA is the fact that some countries would want to pursue their own industrial policies. So with regards to the, CFTA, how does that affect countries that are willing to, take on their own individual policies?
We think and it's again a good question, because if you look at the EPA, which is the Economic Partnership Agreement with Europe, with the EU, we think that it's based on an old model. It's based on that same model that we've historically had, where you trade in your raw materials to Europe, they bring finished goods, and so on and so forth. Whereas we're in the 21st century, our view is that if Africa is going to industrialize, we need to look at some of these fundamentals. The CFTA will do that. The CFTA has an explicit objective of supporting industrialization of Africa. So we're not just trying to trade just in raw materials. We want to actually develop the infrastructure, attract the investment, and also, in effect, bring the capacity building and training that will help us move from trade to investment to industrialization. Is a journey.
What level of optimism underpins the current negotiations to arrive at a workable agreement, against the background of the different colonial experiences on the continent and the linkages that persist along these colonial lines?
Exactly.
I think it's something that we are clearly working on, in the sense that Africans now recognize and accept that Africans must come together to work together for, Africa itself being a more successful economy, broadly speaking. Those trading blocks, or those historical ties, represent important relationships, but they're important historical relationships. People want to look forward. And I would say that, so this is to go beyond, we've seen how far that has taken us. And like you said, we've been at it for quite a while. So what we're trying to do now is that, what exactly is it can we learn from the Asian experience, from the NAFTA experience, from the other experiences where people have come together, and we have seen just vast increases in trade, in development, in industrialization. So some people call Africa the last frontier. And so I think there's a lot of commitment to that. But to go back to your point on negotiations, we've set out a framework for those negotiations. And those framework basically allow consensus, which means that no country is being forced to come into it. Secondly, they recognize, like I said, these differential levels of development and differing needs. So there are some principles that have been put in place. And so far, what we've done is we have our senior officials who are negotiating for us. We have chief negotiators. And of course, you then have the ministers who will ultimately report to the heads of state. So all that framework has been set up. We had a meeting last week, very successful, amongst the ministers, to review the work that had been done by the senior officials and the chief negotiators. And we approved that work and endorsed it. And we've now laid out a roadmap that will lead to the end of 2017 for the, at least, framework agreement coming into place, depending on our ability to overcome these hurdles that you've talked about.
I'm just wondering, that's why I said, look, what is the level? That's my question, was on the optimism that underpins all of this. Again, as historians and political analysts have oftentimes pointed out, some crises we have seen on the African continent have been crises stoked by powers elsewhere on the continent in order to continue to have access to Africa's raw materials. Is there a chance that an agreement of this nature will enable Africa, as it were, leapfrog those crises that are often generated from outside the continent, in order that Africa remains a ground for pillaging?
Well, I think our view is that there's reason for optimism, in the sense that, like I said, there is political will, there is commitment, but people are interested. I mean, Europe and other markets are looking at what we're doing, and our view is that we have to take responsibility for our own development. And if I look at the trade ministers across Africa that I've gotten to know over this last 1 year plus that I've been in this role, I'm confident that we have the right group of people, to focus on what's good for Africa, but creating win-win partnerships. We don't believe that Africa needs to be sort of isolated from the rest of the world. No. What we're saying is that you have to define what your objectives are, what you want to get out of, how you industrialize, and then negotiate on that basis with other markets.
Well, what are the top items on the list for trade? Because obviously, I mean, you cannot say you trade doubles and everything if you're going to have this win-win situation in terms of interaction and relationship with other blocks elsewhere in the world. What are the top items that we'll be looking at when the agreement is finally endorsed?
Okay, so let's start with goods. It's goods, then you go to services. But when it comes to goods, most African countries produce sort of raw materials, which they send off. The first thing is to make sure that those raw materials, that we process them, we add value to them. And as we add value to them, that we're creating markets within our space, in terms of Africa and the regions we're in. So trade in, agricultural products, agri-processing is important. Even when you go to things like cotton, textile, garments, that's important. When you go to manufacturing, even starting with light manufacturing, the important thing is that just look at it like an expanded market for the same things we're doing. Right now, what's happening is that we're importing finished goods and we're exporting raw materials. We think the Continental Agreement will help us to not just export raw materials where it makes sense, but even more importantly, to process those raw materials. And those things are being built into the agreement. We also think that there will be an increase in trade in goods and services, in services, meaning that, even in terms of people being able to move across Africa, it's also something we're looking at, and there's a whole work going on there by the foreign affairs ministers, to enable more African, free movement in Africa. And the whole idea is to create an opportunity for a wider market for services as well. So I think you will find that it's not so much that we're trying to create new products as much as we're trying to create new markets.
Okay, Mr. Ngalaba, if you look at the sub-regional level, look at ECOWAS, it's implementing the ETLS. Now, if you look at the workability of the ETLS, do you think that the CFTA, you understand, is workable?
So I think, like I said earlier, the ECOWAS gives us an opportunity to learn from the experience of doing something on a smaller scale, but still, you know, with all the complications, we have all kinds of countries that meet the kind of that have the kind of issues that your colleague raised. And so far in ECOWAS, what we have seen is the same thing. There is political will, the engagement continues, and frankly, there's a lot of tweaking and correcting to be done to make the CET and the ETLS and the ECOWAS market to work. Yes.
Okay, just before we continue with the Honorable Minister here, we also have guests joining us from our different network centers. Kingsley, let me quickly bring in guests from our Port Harcourt studio. We have Abdul Kadri Asarema, he's Assistant Controller General of Customs, Zone C in Port Harcourt. We'd like to thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Claire. Good morning, Nigeria.
And also from our Lagos studio, we are being joined by Reginald Ikodia, his Chairman, Economic Policy Committee of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, MAN. Mr. Odia, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, let's take up first from our Lagos Network Center, where Mr. Odia has just been introduced. Mr. Odia, you listen to the Honorable Minister, as well as perhaps our background report. To what extent is the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria involved either in presenting position papers on the terms being negotiated for the agreement, or indeed about the scope of the agreement currently under negotiation?
Thank you very much indeed. First, I must appreciate the comments that the Honorable Minister made. He really gave an elaborate presentation of the situation of things in terms of trade within West Africa. He also talked about the EPA, as the Economic Partnership for agreement between ECOWAS and the European Union, and then we talked about this African free trade agreement. Basically, yes, the association, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, has been carried along all the time. We have excellent relationship with the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, particularly with the Minister. So we've had a lot of discussion. All the concerns he raised are generally the same concern we have, because when you want to go into big things, you start with the small ones. First, you have to learn to walk, then you can crawl. I mean, you learn to crawl, then you can walk, and you can run. We are looking at ECOWAS, looking at all the nitty-gritties of getting ECOWAS going. Once that's done, then we can start looking at the African agreement. So what they are doing now is setting up the terms, condition, and the framework. And once that's done, we can begin to build on that. But generally speaking, we are clear about it, but there's a lot of work to be done. We have quite a lot of things to be done, because even looking at our own internal systems, we still need to do a lot in terms of critical infrastructure, in terms of basic needs, in terms of even understanding the trading pattern and system within the country. Talk less of ECOWAS, and then we go into the Africa in general. But generally speaking, the concept is ideal. This is the way to go, and we'll have done it decades ago. But now that we've started, I believe that gradually we'll build into it. But it's something we must take one step at a time and carry everybody along as they come in. I'm happy he has talked about issues of member countries coming in when it is convenient for them to come in. I think that is the way to go. You mustn't force people into many things they don't have capacity to go into. So you allow them to develop, learn from what's going on, and perhaps, come in at the right time. So totally I agree with him, and I think we are working with him in that terms.
Okay, Ms. Odia, I'm wondering, because if member countries, are aware of the benefits, that they tend to get from this agreement, and Nigeria being the largest economy in Africa, might there not be the tendency of making the country or turning the country into dumping ground for, goods from other African countries?
Thank you very much again for this. I don't share this idea that Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa, but let's take it from there. All along, goods have been dumped from other developed countries like, the Asian world, particularly from Europe. We don't have dumped products, but generally speaking, they are coming from Asia. So dumped products are coming from highly developed areas that want to take advantage of our market because they are poorly developed. Within Africa, once we go into it, it will enhance development. It will enhance manufacturing because raw materials can very easily come from neighboring African countries rather than coming from Europe or coming from Asia. So once we can harness our ability to take resources from within, then it goes a long way to develop manufacturing, to develop technology, to develop industry within Africa. So it's something that we really need to key into. There is nothing to fear. The only concern I feel is that Africa lacks critical infrastructure, and we need to start working on it now. If we want to set the template in 2017, then we have to look at the basic needs. We need proper roads, railway system, funding. We need peace and reduce as you travel, between states in Africa. So once all these are done, it becomes easier. I mean, I can go to Zambia, for example, and look at copper, and I can buy copper from Zambia and bring straight away to Nigeria via road or via the railway system and process it, rather than bringing copper from, at the moment, for example, in manufacturing, I belong to the electrical electronics sectoral group, and many of our copper are coming from China. So you can imagine, if it's coming from Africa where the source is, the cost will be low, the two countries will be happy, and we'll remove the third party, which is creating the headaches. So I think it's something that is good news to me, and we need to build that up as much as we can.
I was just wondering, Mr. Odia, we've shown that Mr. Zarema, that's the Assistant Comptroller General of Customs, on the screen in a moment. But just before we bring him in, I just want you to address this point. Lagos, once again, still on Lagos, Mr. Odia. When the agreement takes off fully, this is looking forward now, prospectively, what is that likely to mean for country competitiveness? You're a manufacturer, for instance, if you do not find the Nigerian environment competitive enough for you, what would that mean? And therefore, what should be the country responsibility in showing up its own competitiveness?
Basically, as I said, the step being taken by the ministers are the right steps. We need to bring Africa together, we need to work together and develop together. Once that begins to happen, a lot of other things that are not properly played up now will begin to come up. We have a lot of activities that are not recorded properly. Those businesses or those activities will begin to come up. I don't think we have a problem with competition. I think we have all the advantages of communication, of developing together as a nation, as a continent. I don't think we're going to have competition. What's going to happen is, if, for example, I'm producing in Nigeria and my cost is high, I can very easily go to Kenya, I can go to Ghana, I can go to Benin Republic and produce, and still be able to have direct contact with Nigeria, with all the other countries. But I don't think, and that's why I'm concerned about infrastructure. Once we can critically develop our infrastructure, then it becomes easy for us to take advantage of raw materials that are within us. Don't forget that businesses usually takes better effects where you have your raw material, and where you have the, trading setup, so that you don't have problem with either marketing or getting your raw materials. So all these are going to enhance that development and bring real competition in terms of developing the general environment, but not creating problem for Africa. I think it's an advantage to Africa, whatever develops.
Okay, Kingsley, let's go to Port Harcourt Center, where the Assistant Controller General of Customs and Sea is Mr. Abdulkadir Azarema. Mr. Azarema, this will ultimately, transit into a continental customs union. Now, how seamless do you think that will be, considering the fact that we're still trying to, effect the customs union at the sub-regional level?
One of the objectives of the continental free trade area is to create a single continental market for goods and services with free movement of persons and business persons, to say, and investments. So ultimately, the aim is to create a continental customs union. This can only be achieved when the regional economic communities are able to consolidate their activities. For example, in the ECOWAS, the common external tariff has been adopted in 2015, and the ETLS scheme is working to some extent good. So when these are consolidated and achieved, and other regional economic communities, like the East Africa Economic Community, which they have also advanced, the Southern African Economic Community, and other regional economic communities, when they consolidate their activities within their regions, then ultimately the regions will come together and form one customs union. The aim of the continental free trade area is to increase trade in Africa by about 50% from now to 2022. So if this is achieved, it means the formation of the Continental Customs Union is just by the corner. So everything depends on the success of implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area.
Mr. Zarema, we would like you, you've been dealing with ECOWAS in terms of the ETLS, as we just indicated. What has been the experience? Has this been a smooth ride or has it been jerky?
Of course, I believe it's going to be a smooth ride, because since we have been implementing the ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme, we have gained a lot of experiences. All the problems we have had before, we have addressed a lot of them. And with the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area, we shall be able to use the experiences of the ETLS and cement on what is giving us gap between what we have observed with the ETLS and what we are to implement here. So I want to believe that within the shortest time possible, or within the period of 2022, we shall be able to make progress. Even though the African agenda for economic development is up to 2063, we have a long way to go. But I believe by 2022, we will record some successes.
So, Azarema, you're just saying 2063, well, most of us won't be around by the time, so thanks a lot.
Okay, Mr. Azarema, stay with you. You talked about gaps, observed gaps, of course, in implementing the TLS at the ECOWAS level. Now, can you put a name to some of these gaps? What are those problems and challenges, that you think we need to address, to enable us transit seamlessly into the continental trade agreement?
Okay, under the ETLS, products have to be registered with appropriate authorities before they are admitted duty-free from one country into another. And the traders too, their enterprises have to be registered. So the problems we are facing here is that a lot of traders think that whatever they import or export within the West Africa region, it will just be admitted duty-free. Some of them not knowing that they need to register their products and they need to register their enterprises. So these are some of the gaps. Then there is the issue of roadblocks, a lot of roadblocks between one country into another. For example, the ECOWAS protocol has directed that there should not be more than 4 roadblocks or checkpoints within a 40-kilometer radius of a border station. We take example of Seme to Lagos. The ECOWAS protocol requires that there should not be more than 4 checkpoints from Seme border up to Lagos. So at times, customs and the other security agencies will be able to maintain that. And at times, you'll see other security agencies mounting their roadblocks indiscriminately at various intersections of the road. So these are some of the gaps we have observed. And the National Committee on Implementation of Trade Facilitation, which is domiciled at the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, has done a lot of work to address this situation, including talking with the Inspector General of Police about 2 years ago to talk to other security agencies so that unnecessary roadblocks should be removed and maintain the ECOWAS protocol of maintaining only 4 checkpoints between Seme and Lagos. So these are some of the gaps that are being addressed.
All right, Mr. Azarema, thank you very much. But just maybe you didn't explain, when you said between Seme and Lagos, where in Lagos are you talking about? Is it Maitu? Or is it somewhere, Janiki, you know, it's where, is it Badagry? Badagry is also in Lagos? Or is it Lagos Island?
Yes, from those points up to the market, the markets within Lagos, Mile 2 market, the Alaba market, and the Balogun market. So the inner part of Lagos, where markets are located, there should be free movement of goods.
So, Zarema, thank you very much. We'll come back to you again in the course of the conversation. Just to return to the Abuja studios now, where the Honorable Minister in charge of Investment, Trade and Industry is still with us in the studios. Honorable Minister, you listened, of course, to the other 2 guests from our remote locations at our network centers. Infrastructure upgrade is one point that has been touched on, particularly by the man representative at Lagos. Now, we know this appalling state of infrastructure in most parts of Africa. We have also seen attempts in the past, including the Trans-Africa Highway and so on and so forth. Now, does infrastructure upgrade not also present investment opportunities as part of the ways to catalyze the agreement or the integration of Africa as well as inter-Africa trade? And if that is so, what simultaneous steps are being taken in this regard so that we don't wait, agreement is done, and then we start looking for infrastructure and then start looking to boost inter-Africa trade?
Absolutely. Let me actually start from where the Assistant Controller General stopped. You know, the word roadblocks, he was dealing with it physically, but it's also a figure of speech for all the impediments to trade. You could use it to mean all the approvals that take a long time to get, all the sort of sticky points that, and why that's important, those roadblocks, you know, as a figure of speech, why it's important to deal with them is that they're actually the lower hanging fruits. They will take less money, you know, to deal with, but more political will. And one of the commitments of this government under President Buhari is that, like, we want to make it easier for people to do business. Notice I talked about this last time I was here, and we're not relenting on it. So one of the things we're looking at is this trading across borders and trying to understand all the roadblocks and to make sure that we deal with them, as many of them as possible. So I just wanted to make that point that we're completely aligned with the customs and as well as the manufacturers and the exporters in trying to make it easier for them to move their goods, because it lowers the cost of doing business and, by the way, makes us more competitive. And this is a win-win for all the stakeholders. The second point which you make, which is the longer term but desperately important issue, is infrastructure. As you know, our president, and I know that he's not unique in that regard, has identified the infrastructure deficit as an extremely important impediment to industrialization and to the economy, which is why, if you look at our budgets, most of the money is going to infrastructure. And this is a new thing under this government. The only thing is that it takes time to build infrastructure. But as for the vision of, dealing with this simultaneously, to use your word, absolutely, I think you couldn't have said it better. Let me also say that it's also another reason why we want to partner with private capital. The amount of infrastructure needed and infrastructure gap we have is so significant that even if we spent our whole budget on it, it won't be enough. Meanwhile, like you said, these are good investment opportunities. Remember, I used to be in the investment world myself before I joined. And people are looking for investable opportunities or attractive investment opportunities. So why don't we give it to them? So that they build the roads, they build the rails, they build the power stations and power generation and distribution and everything we need, and the airports. So that's the vision of this government. And a lot of work has been done this year, and I think you will see increasing delivery in that regard. But let me also say that these things take time to deliver. The nature of infrastructure is that it takes time.
Okay, do we have a structure for implementing this agreement? I ask this question because we know that some African countries already have or are into one form of trade agreement or the other with other international, regional blocs. So how does this city address, those partnerships?
Yes, so your question is an excellent one in terms of, do we have structures for implementing that? Well, first of all, for establishing the agreement and implementing it. First, in terms of governance, which is a very important part of structure, African Union has a hierarchy that helps to move things along. So, we have the summit where the heads of states meet. Then you have the ministers of trade who sort of supervise the work and then bring it to the summit. Then you have the senior officials, right, who sort of drive the actual technical work. And then you have the chief negotiators who drive the negotiations. So all those structures are in place. Now, when it comes to the relationship between the CFTA and other agreements, the CFTA will coexist with those other agreements, but with the understanding that the CFTA is our preferred route to development. Remember that this is not either or. No, of course, it doesn't mean we'll stop trading with the rest of the world. We still need an agreement with Europe. In fact, Europe's argument is that. We need an agreement with Asia. We need an agreement with other countries that are strategic to us. In fact, the way things are going now is the use of free trade agreements, or what you might call strategic trade agreements, that are 21st century, that deal with trade, investment, industrialization, the kind of thing we tried to do with Morocco. Morocco was there. And that's an example of an attempt to establish a robust set of agreements for working together for mutual benefit. All those things are mutually coexistent or can mutually coexist with a continental free trade area agreement.
All right, Honorable Minister, thank you again. We'll come back to you. Just to return to Lagos Network Center, we still have Mr. Odaya, the man representative speaking to us there. Is the chair of the Economic Policy Division or Department of Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. In terms of what the Customs Assistant Controller General explained with regard to trading, because of course if you manufacture, you want to be able to get rid of your inventory. Now, what has been the experience of manufacturers in Nigeria dealing with the rest of ECOWAS, and how is this likely to impact on CFTA when it becomes operational?
Thank you very much again. As far as ECOWAS is concerned, we have the ETLS. That's the ECOWAS Trade Liberalization Scheme. Now, this scheme is actually designed to make things easier. As the Controller General said earlier, you have to register your company, you have to register your product before you begin to talk about exports. That process is what we have taken up as an association to make it easy for our members to be able to key in and be able to trade. Because basically all these agreements are designed to make businesses easier in terms of trading, in terms of exchange of ideas, in terms of manufacturing. So our members are registering and we are becoming part of it. And it's good that we share ideas the way we are doing. We do a lot of interaction with the customs. We have virtually, I think it's quarterly or monthly meetings where we discuss issues concerning ECOWAS, headaches and protocols. We also have meetings regarding import issues and so on. We have meetings regarding, these roadblocks, as he has said, as it affects our members. So we are talking about them, and we are gradually building into it. And as I said earlier, we have to learn how to walk before we run. The ECOWAS protocol must develop and become very effective. All the other regional blocks must also become as effective as it should be, so that by the time we open up to the continental one, it becomes a union of all the blocks, all the economic blocks coming together and making it easier. So generally speaking, I think there is an advantage that we've started talking about it now. There is also an advantage that the minister is aware of the issues of infrastructure and the fact that these infrastructures are not something you can develop overnight. It takes time. So when we are looking at 2017, we are looking at putting the basic structure on the ground in terms of agreement and workability, and then begin to keep structures or begin to look at structures as it will enhance and improve, the activities that are going to happen. I'm also happy that he has talked about the relationship between the private sector, which I will say things like PPP, private-public, partnership in terms of development of infrastructure. That is the right way to go. You have a lot of monies, from the private sector that can come into development of infrastructure. When we talked about the EPA, one of the things why the association is concerned about EPA is that we are not on the same playing ground as Europe. And therefore, it's going to be very difficult for us to compete effectively.
All right, Mr. Reginald Odea, thank you very much. Again, we'll come back to you. Now, just to get the Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister, we have some reactions already from our viewers. Before we take those reactions, there's a point. I haven't seen those comments here in the tweets that we have. How will CFTA play out with WTO? Because WTO, that's the World Trade Organization Agreement, has often been used as an alibi for all kinds of trade practices inimical to Nigeria's interest.
Yes, so the World Trade Organization, where we've been working very well with them, you may remember the Director General, Roberto Azevedo, visited us earlier in the year. And in fact, one of the things we've done as Nigeria is that we brought back one of our leading trade experts who has been with the WTO for over 17 years, Ambassador Chiedo Osakwe. He's now our trade negotiator, and he's been involved in working on the CFTA. So you can understand the level of understanding he has of WTO. I think WTO is one of these world systems that, like, what you do, it's a multilateral trading bloc. It's what we do with it, to be honest. I mean, it's supposed to be pro-development, but it's really how you engage. Remember, it's also based on consensus, so it doesn't force you to do anything. Our view is that, like, it can actually be used as an enabler in terms of providing support for the CFTA, but Africans must take responsibility for doing that, just like other parts of the world have done. Okay,
Honorable Minister of Trade and Industry, Mr. Okechukwu Engelama. I know I got that correct.
You got it correct, yeah.
All right, we must let you go now. We've got quite a lot of questions for you, but I know you're pressed for time. So we'd like to appreciate your finding time to join us for this conversation.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I hope I'll come back soon.
I hope when next we call upon you, it will be seamless.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll take a short break now. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. We'll be right back.
Hear the call of change. Stand up, Nigeria. Change is here and it's going to stay. Change begins with you. Oh yeah, make we go. So let the change begin from within. Look at you, oh Gerula. Change begins with you and me. Change begins.
germs, oil, and dirt cause blemishes and uneven skin tone. You need Dettol Even Tone. It removes 99.9% of germs and is formulated to remove excess oil and dirt, helping to reduce blemishes.
Dettol Mom. She only trusts Dettol antiseptic liquid to kill 100 illness-causing germs, and it's recommended for cuts and scrapes. Worry less and love more. Don't just be any mom, be a Dettol mom. Dettol, be 100%
Shaman or for shaman. Oh, let me wash your hand for you. Let me take toothpick and... Hey. According to Professor, tranquilizer.
I am disappointed, aghast, crestfallen, and vanquished at your shameful display.
This week on your award-winning comedy series, Professor John Bull, starring Kanayo Okanayo, Mercy Johnson, Queen Wokoye, Yomi Fash Lanso, Ogus Baba.
I'd like to see Mr. Udo Eto. I hear you now, but find me something.
Are you mad?
Go.
Goodness, August, you've shown your shit.
Oh.
Very nice man, generous.
Okay, anything for the guests. Maybe feature or something.
Happy weekend, sir.
Thank you.
Today is Wednesday.
Professor John Bull, this Tuesday and Friday, 8:30 to 9 p.m. on NTA Network, International, and Star Times.
I'm finished.
Who finished you?
Find me something.
Over and out.
Welcome to the new speed of...
You're welcome back. If you just joined us, it's Good Morning Nigeria. We're live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We just signed off now the Honorable Minister of MITI, that's Industry, Trade and Investment. We're still discussing the Continental Free Trade Agreement. It's ongoing, and hopefully by 2017, the agreement would have been concluded. We still have at our Lagos Network Center the Chair of the Economic Policy Committee of Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, as well as at our Port Harcourt Network Center, Assistant Comptroller General of Customs. That's Mr. Azarema. Now, we have a number of reactions already from viewers who have taken advantage of the Twitter handle. You can see it there on the left side of the screen at NTA GMN. We'll take some of those tweets now. The first from Festus Akimboyawa. I fear Nigeria's trade will not be competitive within CFTA because of high costs of tariff, red tape, and lack of infrastructure.
And Maya Kanyako tweets, African countries should liberalize their economies for growth and foreign investments. There must be mutual beneficial relationship.
And then Sonny Omakoji tweets, continental trade will definitely enhance economic synergy and integration in Africa. It's the way to go.
And again, Michael tweets, continental trade will help us to ensure cash flow in Africa and discourage capital flight, which has been our enemy for years. Kingsley, let me take Mr. Reginald Odia in Lagos. Mr. Odia, if you look at what is happening in Europe, where some members of the European Union are pulling out, either going to the referendum to decide whether or not to remain. And this is basically because of the impact, not just on the respective countries, but in the economies of those countries. Now, what do you think might be the challenge with, a kind of a continental agreement such as the one we're discussing in the near future?
Thank you very much. It's very difficult at this stage to compare development in Europe with that of Africa because, generally speaking, we are so many decades behind development when you compare with Europe. Our key problem now is development of infrastructure. Our key problem is the fact that we need to come together and trade as Africans so that we can save resources. Instead of allowing our resources out, we would use them internally and circulate them internally before we move them out. So those are key issues. And for me, I don't see at this stage, and perhaps in the nearest future, any disadvantage of Africans coming together because there is so much to do. When we decide to come together, we develop infrastructure, we develop communication, we develop trade, we open up linkages, and then we can compare with developed countries or continents. And then we can begin to get worried that, this particular region is developing more and so on, and people will begin to complain. But at this stage, there are no basis for complaint. So I don't foresee any kind of headache at this stage. I think it's something that is key, it's something that we must look at, and it's something that we must take one step at a time to ensure that we carry everybody along. I think that's the issue.
All right, stay with you, Mr. Odia. We asked this question, we posed the question to the Honorable Minister, namely in terms of ranking of goods and services that should be priority, taking off when the agreement, of course, is finalized. What would you like to see? I mean, we know that there are a number of other negotiations, the blue economy, for instance, to get Africa, to explore its maritime opportunities much more closely. We've talked about manufacturing and so on and so forth. If it's manufacturing, exactly what? And then how can we fend off competition or dumping from outside of the continent, particularly from Asia?
Thank you very much. The coming together of Africans will create healthy competition. That's number one. It would make it easier for us to use our raw materials within, which will become cheaper. It would also allow us a situation where we don't have to begin to export our products in raw if we develop well. It pays Africa to add value to products before you export. So that is the key. I think that if we continue to play it that way, it will help us. The key thing I want us to do, if we want to, grow along this line of new idea, is that we must look at our regional blocks. ECOWAS, for example, we must develop our protocols and all the headaches, we must clear them. And the same must be done with the other regional blocks. The East Africa, the South Africa, the North Africa, if there's any, they should clear it and make sure that they are performing at their optimum. And once that is happening, it becomes easier. Trading within Africa is huge. And I can assure you that once that is opened, for many years, for decades, we will begin to see benefits that we've never had before. Because people will begin to move around, and share common ideas. Though we have language barrier in many cases, but our culture is not too far away from each other. So I think the first step is developing infrastructure, developing the blocks to make sure that those key things are there, making it easier for people to move around, also making it easy for people to import raw materials from wherever it's coming. If, as the example I gave before about copper, if I can get my copper from the source in Africa, it makes it easier. It doesn't mean that they should now go and start processing it. No, but they can export as they are doing because they have it. The same thing with Nigeria. We have a lot of agricultural products and other minerals we can export to African countries to develop within, and we can share them in common before we move them on. So I think it's healthy, as I've said, and I always will say that it's a healthy development which will have started decades ago. But now that we have started talking about it, I think we should take it one step at a time to make sure that we develop it, because that, for me, is the right way to go.
Mr. Odia, thank you. Let's again go back to Port Harcourt. Mr. Azarema, I'm sure if you're familiar with the fact that we have quite extensive porous borders through which goods are smuggled in, goods that are, of course, not within the licensed goods. So, do you think that this will become cumbersome in implementing the CFTA in future?
Yes, issue of porous and vast borders in Nigeria in particular, and in other African countries is a big issue. But to address it, there is the issue of integrated border management, where customs officials and all other government agencies will coordinate their activities and share information so that activities of smugglers are being generated to one another under one platform. And the Other aspect is the connectivity of custom systems in the continent, to start with from the regional economic communities. Then the provision of adequate patrol equipment, it will assist. So these are some of the issues. Smuggling will continue to thrive, but with sharing of information and well-coordinated activities, I believe that it will be brought to the barest minimum, and the activities of customs officials and other government agencies will enhance the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area. One other aspect which I want to join to the first statement I made, or the question you asked me about the realization of the customs union in Africa within a short period. The factor that will facilitate it is the interconnectivity of customs systems within REX and then to the entire continent. For example, there was a conference that took place in Burundi sometime in 2011, and it was agreed that all customs systems within regional economic communities must be interconnected within a time period of 3 years then. So from 2011, 3 years, it would be 2014. So it is expected that by 2014, all RECs, regional economic communities, would have connected their customs systems. But we still have some shortcomings there. In the ECOWAS, we have gone far, but the ECOWAS Commission has developed a software called ALISA, where all the customs systems within West African countries will be connected. So this will enhance the formation of customs union within the West African region. Excuse me. And likewise, in the East African regions and the Southern Africa region, they have gone far in terms of their connectivity, for the simple reason that most of the countries in East Africa are landlocked, or what is called land link in trade facilitation. So they were able to interconnect their custom systems compared to those in ECOWAS. ECOWAS, the reason is that most of the countries are on the coast, and they get their cargo easily than those in East and the Southern African regions. But nonetheless, customs administrations are urged to stick to the time frame which has already elapsed, and another time frame given by 2016, which has also lapsed. So we believe with the introduction of the Continental Free Trade Area, 2017 should be set as a new target for the interconnectivity of customs systems that will lead to the formation of customs union within regional economic communities. And maybe by another set period, then the Continental Customs Union.
Mr. Azarema, I'm still with you because I'm wondering, ECOWAS has been in existence for over 40 years, and we've been implementing the ETLS, as long. And if now we're entering into a larger market, by this agreement, which runs into trillions of dollars, what is the assurance that the customs service, you understand, will be able to address those challenges? For instance, registration of goods, movement, of goods and services across borders.
Well, with the introduction of the new policy on continental free trade areas, customs administrations, directors general of customs administrations in Africa have met twice, one in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2015 and the other in Zimbabwe in 2016, just last November. They have analyzed the situation, the current situation, and tried to find the ways forward, the solutions to the problems we are facing. And the areas identified were the interconnectivity of custom systems, which they emphasized that it has to be done immediately. Though no set date has been given, but I want to believe that 2017 should be set. Then the introduction of one-stop border posts, where all customs processes and other border agencies processes will be made under one single process, under one public hall, where all processes for import in one country will translate as export processes for the other country. So if these things are adhered strictly and implemented, and in addition to the provision of necessary equipment like patrol vehicles and communication gadgets, I want to believe that the situation will improve for the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Zarema. Just, before we move over to Lagos again, I would like you to address this question. Again, looking ahead, if the agreement leads ultimately to an African customs union, what would that mean in terms of receipts collectible by the Nigerian Customs Service? Are you likely to lose your position as a cash cow?
Yeah, of course, with the introduction of the Continental Free Trade Area, customs revenue will reduce because goods that are admitted duty-free within the continent will be so many. And since duty cannot be collected on them, that means customs revenue will reduce. But that is not the ultimate goal of government. The government is aimed at developing the economy within individual member countries and the whole continent at large. Therefore, with free movement of goods, there will be more economic activities. And with more economic activities, there will be more production, more export, and more import. In this regard, government will make money because individuals will make money, corporate organizations will make money. So ultimately, the nation is making money. Another benefit is that manufacturers within the continent will have the opportunity to source their raw materials within the free trade area. They don't need to start looking for such materials from far away, where it will cost them more in terms of foreign exchange and transport, like freight charges. Then on the side of the consumer, he has opportunities to source for his goods within the free trade area, whereby goods have landed with low costs, since the goods are manufactured within the African continent, and therefore they are landed with low cost compared to when they come from outside the African continent. Therefore, to the consumer, prices of goods will be a little bit lower. So ultimately, the individual member countries and the continent at large will benefit. So this is the effect of the introduction of the Continental Free Trade Area on customs and on national economies.
All right, Mr. Abdulkadir Zarema, Assistant Controller General of Customs and C, speaking to us from Port Harcourt Network Center. We'd like to appreciate you, Mr. Zarema, for your contribution.
Thank you very much.
Let me quickly take the last question for Mr. Reginald Ike Odia. Very briefly, Mr. Odia, what's been your experience with the common external tariff with regards to this new agreement? Because man has had some, reservations about the CET.
Thank you very much. The CET was a structure that was set up to assist in developing, especially manufacturing. But along the line, perhaps because of communication and so on, we had issues. But these issues are being addressed, and it's an issue of ensuring that the tariff that are designed for whatever it is are applied for what it should be. For example, tariff for raw materials should not be more than tariff for finished products. So those are some of the things we are seeing along the line. And I think that it's being worked on because we've compiled that and gradually we're achieving that sort of result. So I think it's we are moving in the right direction. And I think that working with the customs and looking at the CET as it were, rolling it around all the time, that we should be able to perfect it and then achieve the kind of results we are looking for.
All right, Mr. Reginald Adike-Odia, Chairman, Economic Policy Committee of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, joining us from our legal studio. Mr. Odia, thank you.
Very much.
That's it on conversation for this topic. That's the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. I don't know if you made sense out of it, but we promise you we'll keep an eye on the proceedings and developments, and we promise to bring them to you. Now to sports.
All right, now I'm talking sports. The Nigeria Football Federation pledges to pay Super Falcons entitlements as NPFL pre-season Super 4 tournament kicks off today in Enugu. Details of the stories with our sports desk.